I want to share a journey with you over the last few years of how we've been taking an initial hunch all the way through to where we are right now in the midst of sort of productizing our regenerative approach to rewilding the oceans. After living in the woods for a year when I was 30, off grid, doing nothing, stopping doing what I had done in my 20s, which was startup businesses, I found a different level of peace, a different sort of settlement in being happy being, not doing. Now, as I come back from that quiet place outside of the system, I now find myself in a kind of lab environment where I am working on my own ideas that I think are of value, and also working with organizations on their ideas, trying to bring them to life, trying to find interaction. And today, what I'm going to share primarily about is how my engagement with the ocean, as you've heard and seen, as I did, is currently still unfolding, but has unfolded significantly in the last 3 years, and try and get into some of the lessons that I've learned in that journey. What I find myself loving is finding gaps that seem valuable and just beginning to create inside them. And the reason I love gaps is because normally, if there's a well-defined job, there's somebody better for it than me. But the wonderful thing about a gap is that there's not really any gatekeepers of that gap, because there's nobody paying attention to it. And what that means for me is it's a way to just begin creating without seeking permission, without seeking approval. And just by the nature of placing attention and beginning to speak and dialogue with people, you are already drawing the world in that direction. And that feels, to me, wonderful. It feels empowering. My very act of being there simply starts to bring attention in that direction. And so I love that very much as a starting point. I knew when I was coming back to the system, I wanted to come back in a way that I could experience something that would impact me, because I know that from experiences where I am then able to speak from with a greater sense of inspiration and strength. On that journey, two things happened. I met Gail. Gail's somebody who convenes lots of events at COP and at the UNGA and at Davos. And she told me that oceans are the most underfunded SDG, that they're not even represented in COP26 with one day of themes. Yet, as we know, 2/3 of the planet, half of all of our oxygen production. So she made it very clear, and I trusted her, that there is a gap narratively, and at the top end of the system, there's a gap in awareness and appreciation of this large part of our habitat. And on that journey, I met Steve Simpson, who showed me these wonders of listening to the ocean and opened my ears to a world that I thought was silent. And between the two, I kind of realized that there was a gap at the top and an under-resourced, underfunded, brilliant professor with the wonderful tools that enable us to engage without much permission or big budgets or what have you. So I felt that that might be space for me to operate in. So I took that story that I had learned from Steve and my own experience and adventure, took it to COP26, ended up through sending lots of social media updates to Gail on stage with her and Google at COP26, sharing the stories of the ocean, which led to a collaboration with Google at COP27 in Egypt. We built a listening station where you could go in and hear the coral reefs live streamed from Sharm el Sheikh into COP whilst everybody was beaming out. And you could learn the basics of listening to the ocean. We built an app, and that began to grow internally within Google stakeholders as some of the senior leadership team came to see our exhibit in the middle of the Blue Zone. That actually made its way for a day in 50 countries to the Google homepage. If you click that link, you came through to our application. And so for me, this was obviously greatly exciting. I felt like we had got ourselves right into the engine of the internet and into global culture. But it was interesting to see how these interactions and these artistic impressions that we had made actually grew, not just publicly, but actually also internally within Google, that it started to gain momentum, and to the point where they wanted to put it on their homepage and went out to hundreds of thousands of, possibly millions of people. One of the challenges I found with Google was I could never get the data out of them to prove the science part of our art and science project, which is what has actually led to our acoustics project. A few things have come out of that sort of hub of creativity in COP27. One is that we've just finished a research project with Cornell's Lab of Ornithology and with Google DeepMind, the AI branch of Google, looking at a Mars data set, the biggest data set of reef restoration in Indonesia. That paper will get published middle of next year. What you can see in this image is a sonograph or spectrogram that visualizes the audio file. And we have built a machine learning algorithm that models the patterns, finds patterns that are unknown, and groups them into clusters and shares them with the ecologist to massively reduce the time it takes to analyze the files. Very cheap to deploy hydrophones, only $100 or so to put a microphone in the water that's used in this kind of research project, but costs thousands of dollars to listen back to hours and hours and hours of audio files of precious marine ecologist time. With these models, we've been able to reduce that time by 10x and then feed that in some scenarios even into surf perch, which is Google's models, reduces the time even further from the ecologist. So we're extremely proud of that. And if we move on to the next slide, you can see how the journey has changed in a different way. The last time I was with the Xynteo guys was at New York Climate Week. And on that week, I got to meet this lady in the blue suit who is called Sylvia Earle, or Her Deepness, as the ocean community call her, National Geographic's Explorer at Large. What a title. With her, I met this chap here called Sam for the second time, who's an Earthshot Prize winner of 2021. He is the CEO of Coral Vita, who do coral farming. And they take corals from the ocean, put them into their incubators, put them into a coral gym, try and stress them to grow them, and then put them back. They can get 50 times faster growth rates than left in the wild. And through those conversations, through the work that I've been representing, we have now designed an experiment which is just waiting for approval. This is a live website right now to do completely pioneering research, looking to see whether we can use regenerative acoustics that I mentioned earlier, not on coral larvae settlement, but actually on the algae that coral fragments feed on, to see if we can further expedite the growth of the corals in their coral farms. So I've gone from being an outsider to this ocean space who didn't even know I was interested in it, to getting a hunch from meeting Steve Simpson that there was something of value and some kind of gap. And then I've moved through into beginning small projects, experimental projects, and now we're right at the pioneering front end of moving ocean work forwards, both on the machine learning and on the experimental science side. It's work I never would have imagined I would be doing and never should be doing, but frankly the gaps are so large that it's made sense for me to sit in them, and the world has kind of sucked me up into it, including having me speak at the UN on World Oceans Day in New York in June, representing this work and continuing to try to move it forwards. I want to make a point and try and draw some thoughts and learnings for myself out, and then as we move into dialogue, see how they relate to you in your worlds and the challenges that you're facing. For me, creating is not producing. When we think about production of business and what it means to be a producer or to be an organization that is producing, it is fundamentally a different piece of work to that of creating. And the way I'm meaning this is that in the act of creating, there is no precedent, there is no clear end goal. And so much of business life is reverse engineering point B back to point A and thinking about how to be strategic. That is incredibly vital, valuable, and important. And obviously, creating and producing are deeply interlinked. But where I've found that I've been able to add the most value and to be able to work on new things is where I've let go of a clear endpoint and just able to embrace where I see there's a gap and where there's possible life. This sums it up better than I could on my own. I think the key one that I wanted to draw your attention to was experiment and iterate together rather than do the job right the first time. And I think ultimately, culturally, that's the thing that in my sort of lab experiments try to communicate and convince my collaborators is that it's okay. We don't have to get it right first time. We'll keep it small so that it doesn't cause a problem, but we are going to learn something and be able to produce a story from this open-ended creativity.
Did you find that Google were like of a similar mindset then, Dave, when you started to collaborate with them on kind of using the DeepMind models to help you, or did you have to convince them to work differently?
This sort of partner in crime mindset was already shared, but I was hyper conscious that the next rung of the organization outside of them, they're a bit of an outlier and a heretic probably compared to the rest of the teams that they had to interface with. And actually that is where this sort of mutual respect comes from, that although I sort of sit on the outside and I'm on the entrepreneurship side, I deeply respect the intrapreneurship, the internal kind of spirit of creativity that's required. And I think the common ground and language that I found from Shah Love from the Side Business School, where she talks about systempreneurs, really, whether inside or outside, we are all working to move the system forwards. And I think it is that ground that we foster this spirit in, which then goes one step further. Often I find that first collaborator, but they are immediately met with the production culture that goes around them. In that little hub of energy that we create, there's an appreciation that 0 to 1 is very different from 1 to 2. And I'm sure it's something that we're all familiar with. I try to pincer a problem from the top down and from the bottom up. And actually, those two realms go very well hand in hand. One is being strategic about the large problem. Does the ocean matter? Where do we want to get to? Realizing there is a goal to get to 50% of the ocean protected by 2050. Do we have everything in place or on the roadmap that we need? No. Okay, fine. That's the very rational, strategic, working backwards kind of finding a place for myself in that problem. But then the opposite side is starting from the bottom. Can I create experiences in digital content, in installations and interactions, in immersions that can affect people, that capture hearts and minds, both externally out in the world, but also internally within the organizations of the partners that I work with, like within Google, the next person within the organization that needs to catch the vision and the dream and ultimately find it slightly de-risked from where it was a few months ago. Knowing my current limits, not being delusional about how much influence I have, but also being very quick to update my operating system as soon as we deliver something new, being aware that the influence has now shifted. So not being caught in a delusional mindset or in a small mindset, because actually with the delivery of just one item, one product, actually the ability to connect with the broader world and to attract more resources to this gap and this problem can be exponential. In the end, we want to be part of sonic protection, giving marine protected areas around the planet teeth so that they can have the right evidence to have effective and immediate prosecution of those breaking the rules, but also to give those that want to invest in ocean solutions the trust that they need to know that the thing that they've invested on is still there and growing well. The system doesn't trust me in a way that I can sell to the governments that I want to right now. It's on the way. But in the meantime, what we know we can sell, listening stations to eco resorts and aquariums. So in my journey of trying to sort of take a hunch and move it into something clear where we found a gap, where we can now turn that into a business, I've realized that that's the product we can sell. 30 to 50,000 pounds for installing an installation like the one we did with Google at COP that increases the engagement of the customers of the aquariums and eco resorts with the coral reef, which they fundamentally come to see and now they can hear. And this is my route to getting more investment. I have communities and networks of investors that are very comfortable investing 1 to 2 million in a solid seed raise. But in order to qualify for that, I have to show that there's the first couple of customers are in the door. And so it's fundamentally the eye of the needle through which I need to squeeze myself from the broad problem that was unspecified through to broad solution at the end. We are now in that process right now as we speak. Just to encourage you, for me, it happened slowly. When I find a hunch, it might take me a year or so to find something specific I can make. And it might take me another year or so to produce a prototype that actually speaks to the problem and solves it, at least for one person or in a small way. And then it takes me another year or so to establish something and actually get a customer that buys something from me that speaks to that solution. And so I'll be interested to hear your experiences, but when we're truly doing new and novel things where the roadmap is not there at all or is not clear, we need to be kind to ourselves as well. These things don't happen overnight, and it takes a while for people to get with the program. And actually, there's a trust that builds up in the background as well by being around for a couple of years, that we didn't just dream this up yesterday as well. So put it on the slow cooker. Don't think of it going in the microwave. One of the keys to my ability to move these ideas forwards has been producing what I would call a minimum viable creation, a tiny little video that summarizes what I'm up to, what we've learned, what we've seen, or what we've clarified, so that I can send it in a WhatsApp to somebody, or so that I can publish it to my Instagram or my LinkedIn and tag the various collaborators in it. I have a YouTube channel. When I lived in the woods, I made weekly videos, and I had a global community of about 50,000 people all over the world knitting me socks and sending them to me because they thought I'd be cold in the winter, or telling me that I needed a carbon monoxide detector because I might choke myself out from a badly made log fire. I kind of had this interesting interaction with the global community through this content, and I guess that's where it forged itself into my way of creating and working as a way of developing relationships on the fly. Small video products are not threatening to people. The more polished and the better quality it is, the more people get scared and worried, in my experience. The smaller the video is and the more informally you share it, the more intimate it feels, and the more influential ultimately it can be when trying to build that early band. So a small external product that goes to the public can actually create a large internal impact, more so than if you actually targeted it as an internal comms piece. In that first piece that you produce, for me, it's just looking for one key connection. Does this land with one other team member to join the band? If so, then I've done my job. And then we move forwards again with that new starting point. Just a simple concept. You don't have to get on a boat that you don't know how to sail and go up the Irish Sea and happen to meet a professor who tells you about listening to the ocean. But the theme there really is that I've gone to the end of my world and asked them for the next person at the end of their world that I could speak to. And then I've listened intently to them, and he's blown my world apart and changed my path. And so I call this a risky coffee. You know, depending on the size of the organism you're interested in and the size of the scale of the difference of problem you're interested to find, you know, who's the most different person to you, and could you ask them who the most different person to them is, that they might be able to connect you to see, have a conversation and see what you learn in that. I mean, this is the immersions going into Mumbai and into these settlements, is to try and find an interaction or a moment there that can turn the lights on or change something in your operating system. So a risky coffee. I challenge you to see if you can, if you're looking for to find a new hunch, a new problem to solve, maybe that's the way to start. As we come to land, I'm interested to hear where you're at on this journey, where you're at with your ideas, where you see yourself on this journey. Thank you very much for listening.